Dear student, I'm very sorry that we are not meeting today, but unfortunately, as you know, we have had to define new procedures to make sure that everyone remains, let's say, safe amid the growing concern connected to the coronavirus or COVID-19. As part of this, our final three lectures will be converted into video lectures. And I hope, that with these materials you can, let's say, have access to all the knowledge concerning the last three topics in our course this year. Anyhow, you can reach me through email, or we can organize Skype on a one-to-one or one-to-many basis. So the topic for today is compensation and benefit. Compensation and benefit is a practice area which is quite technical within HR. And as you will see, we will deal with that by focusing on the main characteristics of the tool and practices to be used in this area. So before we get into the details, though, I think it's important for you to consider the relevance from the point of view of management of this area. There are different reasons why compensation and benefits and performance management are important. The first one, the use of a structured approach to defining rewards and evaluating performance can provide a very relevant and important support to managers in influencing their employees. Clearly, as we will see, reward is not the only element, but it's important for managers to possess tools that can help in direct and align employees' behaviors. The second thing which is important is that performance and reward are among the strongest tools, and also they tend to occupy the most time within the manager's agenda. And finally, rewards are in their essence the way in which an organization recognizes the support it receives from its employees. Therefore, designing a structured and well-crafted approach to rewards and performance management is a necessity to organization, and HR is in charge of that. There are two ways in which we can analyze performance and reward. The first one is contents and the second is processes. When we refer to content, to talk about the specific rewards that people receive, and we will see that they can be differentiated between intrinsic and extrinsic. And we refer to processes to identify the steps through which a person has to go within the HR practices in order to be able to, receive feedback and to be rewarded. We know from research, particularly research on fairness, that they are both relevant, but processes tend to have a stronger influence on people than contents. It means that regardless of what you receive as a reward, if you don't believe in the process, if the process is not accurate, transparent, and fair, the rewards you receive are not being converted into job satisfaction and positive commitment to the organization. Who's in charge of this area? From the HR point of view, there are three, roles. Clearly, the HR business partners, which mean the people who are in charge of dealing directly with employees and line managers on a daily basis, who will be at the end of the process and supporting the drafting of the performance and reward system. Then we have the specialist function of compensation and benefit, those who design and decide the policies of reward, and also HR development, because one of the consequences of measuring performance is to define and invest in policies aiming at having people to develop. Outside of HR, this is, as I mentioned before, a practice area that involves several different actors, among them the different supervisors who are in charge of evaluating and rewarding people, and top managers as a whole, to make sure that the whole system is aligned to the overall goals of the organization. So let's see first the reward system. As I mentioned before, there are two kinds of rewards. We have extrinsic rewards and we have intrinsic rewards. Extrinsic rewards are those that target the employee's basic needs, like survival, security, and recognition. Examples of those are obviously financial payments, working condition, management behavior. As for intrinsic rewards, they are more concerned with the psychological enjoyment and satisfaction or challenge that people perceive internally, and they are particularly important. An example of those is the way in which we design work. So autonomy, the ability to, let's say, job craft, which means design part of the work alongside your desires and so forth. The reward system usually comprises both extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. And this connection between the two has given origin to what is called today the total reward approach, which means that we understand that rewards are composed both of objective, observable components and intrinsic rewards, which means the way in which people, let's say, interpret their role within an organization. The all of that, the total reward thing is, the idea of the total reward mix comes from the idea of considering the different components of the reward system within the payment system. What are the main objectives of a reward system? The first is obviously to align individuals and organizations in order to attract and retain talent. So we use incentives mix to send powerful messages to people, either to come and stay and or to perform in a specific direction. Second thing, which is very important from the HR point of view, this system has to guarantee that there's internal and external equity and fairness, which means that people need to believe or perceive that they are paid fairly on the basis of how they compare to others in the organization, internal equity, and outside of the organization, in other organization, external equity. Finally, obviously, the system needs to be sustainable. We cannot be spending more than we earn from the system itself. What are the options of the reward system, which is the basics of how we define reward management options? We tend to see that there might be three different options. Job-based, which means we assign wages on the basis of the complexity, difficulty, and content of jobs. So, in this case, I'm your professor. My salary is not going to be aligned to who I am personally, but to the job per se, which means that regardless of whether it's me or somebody else, when the job in itself is the same, the reward will be aligned to the contents of the job. And therefore, is it Luca or Sabrina or whoever, doesn't really matter much. Second possibility is to use the person-based approach, which means in this case, you're looking at Luca and you ask yourself, hey, let me understand how experienced is he, what is his background, what's the knowledge he possesses, and therefore we are deciding to pay the person on the basis of his or her own characteristics. Third possible approach is performance-based. So we don't think about Luca or Sabrina or whoever or the job per se, but we try to understand how are they working? So what are they producing? And therefore we use their performances as the basis to define how we're going to reward them. Finally, and actually in most cases, we tend to have a mix of them. So we might have some job-based as usually this provides the backbone of the system. Then we adapt on the basis of the seniority, knowledge, skills of the person, the value. So maybe the job gives us the baseline salary, and then we increase or decrease it on the basis of the seniority, competence, other person level characteristics. And then we add, and that's usually the incentives, a variable pay, which is connected to the performances that people are exhibiting. So that's most of the time, that's the usual mix. What are the basic techniques which are important in reward management? Clearly, the issue of defining how to link salaries to jobs requires us to define a system in which we can order jobs, and we can decide which jobs are more important and therefore we want to pay them better, which jobs are less relevant to the company and therefore we are willing to pay them less. This requires to work on two techniques. The first one is job analysis. We need to collect information, which is usually then written in the job description, on characteristics of the job which are relevant for us deciding how much it weighs, how important it is. And then we have job evaluation, which means using that information and adopting methods and criteria to convert that information into some measure or some order of relevance. As you can see, there can be different job evaluation methods. From the less complex ranking, you just take the jobs and you sit there, maybe you talk with the manager, the CEO, the entrepreneur, whoever, and you come out with a list from the most relevant job to less relevant job, and then you decide how to pay them accordingly. This is a very baseline approach, useful when you're running a very small organization. It has several issues. The first one is not so easy to decide. Then, in the order, how are you aligning then the rewards to the order where the person is? Second approach is classification. In that case, we define a broad set of different jobs which are characterized by some specific and relevant internal content. And these groups, then we see names of jobs which are part of this group. So the salary will be defined by classes of jobs, and that makes it a little bit easier to identify similarities between jobs and make sure you are not really distributing too much the salary across them. The third and final, the most complex and usually the most used by large companies, is the point system, which means we use criteria that convert job descriptions in numbers, objective numbers, which are like weight. They are measures of the complexity of jobs. So the typical example of this, and probably the first, was the Hay plan. So coming from the Hay consulting firm, which describes the importance of jobs on the basis of three characteristics: know-how, so the sum of all the knowledge required by the job. So not what Luca possesses again, but the knowledge required by the job of being a professor. Second, problem solving. Second factor is, regardless of the knowledge which is required, how complex are the decisions you have to take? And clearly, the more complex, the more important the role. And finally, accountability. So the action you take on the job, where are they ending? What's their impact on the overall organization? Again, the more important the impacts, the more important the job. Once we do this, we have all the information to establish the pay structure and the level. The pay structure is basically the line which connects salaries and complexity of jobs and weight of jobs, importance of jobs. And we usually design it as a line, so it's basically in a graph. And, the pay level defines the pay basis. Basically, the line is going to be the median approach to pay, which means that for that kind of complexity of the job, that's the kind of salary which is the most likely salary to be assigned. And then we might have pay dispersion, which means how much we want to differentiate across jobs or within jobs as well. So those decisions are clearly affected both by internal equity and external equity. Here you can see an example of a pay structure and the levels according to the so-called broad banding approach. You see here that we have the yellow line, which is the pay trend line, where we locate the, let's say, optimal or, let's say, median pay for that subset, that range of points, so importance of jobs. And then we have the, let's say, the dispersion around the line, which allows us to decide on different strategies even within the same bands. This approach is called broad banding because you see we are taking several positions with several weights, and we are putting all of them together in order to have the ability of, let's say, having strategies where differentiation between actual salaries can be managed according to our goals. Just to give an example of the pay structure, you see here you can have different approaches. You can have a steeper pay structure, which means you are differentiating a lot. So managers are going to be paid much more than lower level jobs, or you can have a flatter line. Usually these differences are defined according to the, let's say, the industry. For instance, social cooperatives tend to have a flatter curve, while, private bankers, some consulting, they tend to have steeper curves. Okay. That's all about reward. Now let's revert to performance management. Performance management is another component of the reward structure. What is it? It's a yearly process, usually today. And it's a process through which a company takes its goals and, let's say, deploys them at the level of individuals. So to make sure that if people reach their individual goals, those will be the unit goals, and the unit goals in turn will be the company goals. This process is clearly monitored during the year. HR has the goal to see whether it's happening, how it's happening, to reinforce it, to make sure that things are going in the right direction, and it's usually evaluated at the end of the period. The goal of the process are to determine two things, usually rewards, mainly variable pay or incentives, and second, development in career. So we measure performance, we provide feedback to people, and we decide whether they can grow or if they need to learn something. This occurs through a process which is called calibration. What's calibration? It's a complex way in which we try to make sure that, despite the fact that people are evaluated by different managers, when we bring all their evaluation together, they stick together. So the criteria tend to be the same. So this usually occurs at, let's say, successes level of aggregation. You have first the first level, then second, third. So at each of these stages, people from being evaluated from their peers, from line managers get to be evaluated cross, so that the different line manager can align their criteria. So everybody gets a fair evaluation in the end. Here you see the performance management cycle. It's the way it usually is. So first, we define the goals. That's usually at the onset of the year. Then there's regular review and monitor. Many times it takes the form of a midterm meeting where managers and employees, sit at the table and they discuss what they have been doing. And then finally, at the end of the year, there's the performance evaluation with its consequences. It's very important during regular review and monitor to use feedback and corrective action to make sure that people are receiving good information in order for them to target the goals that they have been assigned. It's usually a tool designed at the corporate level by the HR function, and it's cascaded throughout the company. There are many elements in it which are important processes, clearly. What are the timing, the schedule, and then the tools to be used. Then we have the roles and the actors. What's the role of the manager, the employee, the HR? Usually the manager and the employee have a conversation, and the HR makes sure that this conversation is first happening, occurring, really, and second, it's relevant, useful to both the line manager and the employee. Then there are technologies. Today, much of this process is being managed through technologies online. So there are conversations, but then the data are collected at the collective level of the organization. And then another important element is many times we do evaluate not only goals, but also behaviors. So it's important to see whether in the process we are defining behaviors or we let managers and employees agree upon them on the basis of the specific jobs. This process is going through some redesign today. What are the major trends? The first one is most companies are trying to make this process simpler. It's a very cumbersome process, requires a lot of time by everybody, particularly by managers who end up having conversation with many different employees. So one idea is, how can we make it faster, easier for people to practice? Second, it's clear that performance does not, it's not getting better only on a yearly basis, but it can get better every day. So it's important to have everyday performance management behaviors and practices, which most of the time take on the form of what is called today continuous performance management. So managers and employees are using mobile phones, smartphones, or tools to provide feedback continuously. Third thing is, in order for the system to work properly, managers need to strengthen their capabilities. Evaluating others is not an easy job. So we need people to practice a lot. We need to get them through training. We need to make sure that they understand how important their role is. And finally, there's the opportunity today of redesigning by using existing technologies, which can, for instance, use data. One of the examples is that we can use data, the manager can take notes on the performance of people during the year, and then we can use all those data to perform some kind of advanced sentiment analysis. So there are many possible avenues of development for that. So I'm also posting for you the link to an interesting presentation by one of the companies offering these new tools, and I hope you might want to take a look at that. And I think that's pretty much the core of what I wanted to address with you. Again, feel free to send me email or contact me if there's anything you want to clarify on. And, I really hope to see you soon. If we are not seeing anyhow, I will be posting the videos for the next lectures. And come on, all on together, please follow the indication we are receiving today from the government, the university, and everybody around. And if we stick to what we have been asked, I'm sure we're gonna solve these issues together. I'm really sorry for what you are going through, particularly for international students, but not only them, but rest assured we'll do whatever we can to make sure your studying and your learning are not going to be affected by that. But first and foremost, health and safety of people are our concern. Hope to see you soon then, and have a nice weekend. Bye.